All right, let's dive right into this one. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating document. We are exploring a highly detailed manifesto titled Utopia and the Home Without Marriage and Family. This was written by Guide Shufeng, the founder of Life Shenyuan, or to use the original phrasing, Yuanze Shengming Chanyan Chuangshiruan Daoyou Shufeng. What we're looking at here is a complete, systematic blueprint for an entirely new kind of ideal society. Throughout history, humanity has always dreamed of a perfect world, right? Well, this source text claims to have objectively analyzed exactly why all past historical utopias failed, and it proposes a radical new solution called the second home. We're going to look closely at his arguments, totally neutrally, to understand exactly how this proposed society is built from the ground up using core Life Shenyuan values.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the quest for utopia. Second, the flaws of past utopias. Third, the second home blueprint itself. Fourth, the requirements for entry. And finally, the idealist's sacrifice. Starting with Section 1, the quest for utopia. The universal pursuit of an ideal realm.
To kick things off, Shufeng establishes that pursuing an ideal society isn't just some modern whim. It's a universal human attribute. It is literally the everlasting spiritual driving force of historical sages across the board. If we trace the timeline from Plato's Republic way back in 375 BC, over to Thomas More, Edward Bellamy, and even 19th century Marxist-Leninist theories of communism, we see this singular common aspiration, leading humanity into a perfect society. And Shufeng actually groups spiritual sages like Lao Tzu, Sakyamuni, Jesus, and Muhammad into this exact same category. He argues that at their absolute core, their primary wish was also to guide humanity toward this ideal social existence. But we haven't just sat around theorizing about this, right? We've actually tried to build these places. The text points out that humans have constantly explored this in reality. I'm talking about American experiments like Brook Farm, Fruitlands, and the Shakers, all the way to massive state-driven projects like Soviet collective farms and the People's Communes in China. Now, Shufeng fully acknowledges that these physical explorations ultimately failed in practice. But, and this is key, he argues they shouldn't just be tossed aside. Instead, they left behind a massive amount of spiritual wealth. They acted like stepping stones that pushed humanity to a higher level. And, according to his worldview, they ultimately laid the foundation for us to enter what he calls the Life Shenyuan era. Which brings us to Section 2, Flaws of Past Utopias. Basically, why did these historical attempts fail? To understand his new blueprint, we have to look at how Shufeng breaks down exactly why these past visions fell apart. He operates on the idea that an imperfect theory will inevitably lead to a failed practice. He identifies 8 major flaws, and the first half of these are deeply spiritual and philosophical. He points out a fundamental lack of a correct concept regarding the universe, time, space, and what he specifically terms the greatest creator. Past attempts, he argues, completely lacked a reliable belief system. They didn't have a comprehensive understanding of where life comes from, how it develops, and where it's ultimately going. Without a clear, specific definition of human life's actual value and significance, the foundations of all these past utopias were just inherently unstable. And those philosophical gaps? Well, they led straight to structural limitations. Past societies remained totally trapped by traditional family structures and national borders. Or, as he playfully puts it, they were just turning over in the field of the country. They also completely overlooked the darker realities of human nature, our tendencies toward laziness, decay, and autocracy. Another really fascinating critique here is that past systems lacked clear, systemic guidance. Instead, they relied heavily on fear tactics, literally just telling people to go to hell if they misbehaved. Finally, Shufeng points out a psychological flaw. Past utopias either severely depressed love and sex, or totally indulged them, lacking any kind of spiritual, heart-centered guidance for human relationships. Moving on to Section 3, the second home blueprint. Let's look at the Life Shenyuan solution. So, how does he fix this? The text introduces the blueprint for the second home with marriage and family. Shufeng frames this whole concept as a continuation or a sequel to those past utopian practices. The goal is to keep the essence of human intelligence but dodge all those past defects. Where past attempts were often super dull, incredibly strict, and suppressed human nature, the second home directly counteracts that. It is designed to feature endless recreational activities, material wealth, and, crucially, absolute freedom of love and sex. It's meant to emulate the lifestyle of what the text calls celestial beings. Let's break down the core structural features of this proposed community. Right at the center, everything is governed by Life Shenyuan values as the primary standard of living. Economically, it borrows a pretty familiar concept: work according to your ability and distribute according to your need. But structurally, it radically diverges from anything in modern society. The blueprint explicitly calls for the complete removal of the consciousness of family, religion, political parties, and even the very concept of a country. And perhaps the wildest part? The text states this society will operate with absolutely zero laws, zero regulations, zero commandments, and no dharma whatsoever. So, without laws, how does a place like this even function? On a lifestyle level, the text asserts that everything depends purely on the power of soul, allowing individuals to simply act according to their nature. There are no forced assignments. You choose your work based entirely on your own character. Residents would participate in collective activities and eat together in collective canteens, sure, but they'd operate with extreme personal liberty. This is especially true regarding relationships, maintaining that this absolute freedom of love and sex is central to the celestial lifestyle. Section 4. Requirements for entry. Who actually qualifies for this utopia? This is where it gets really practical. If this blueprint exists, what does it actually take to get in? Shui Feng lays out 8 highly specific criteria. As we go through these, I want you to ask yourself, would you make the cut for this proposed utopian lifestyle? The first set of entry requirements are deeply internal and spiritual. Right off the bat, you must fully comprehend and willingly follow life genuine values. You have to be completely willing to sacrifice yourself for the happiness of humankind, so a demand for absolute selflessness. You also need to be mentally and physically healthy and genuinely love working. And interestingly enough, you actually need a super high level of self-regard. You must consider yourself to be one of the most civilized and excellent people among all human beings. Moving over to the practical and social qualifications, the demands just keep coming. You must have generally paid off all your worldly debts and obligations. You have to completely sever worldly attachments. On a day-to-day basis, you must enjoy entertainment, prefer to be strictly clean and tidy, and genuinely believe that your presence brings happiness to others rather than worries. Finally, you must actively yearn for this specific celestial-inspired existence described in the text. You have to aspire toward what Shufeng calls the Celestial Islands continent and the Elysium world. And that brings us to our final part. Section 5. The Idealist's Sacrifice. The True Cost of Seeking Perfection. To wrap up this manifesto, the text beautifully shifts focus from the blueprint itself to the mindset of the very people willing to build it. Xi Feng quotes another author to honor what he calls the authentic idealists. These are the folks who, regardless of success or failure, literally despise high positions and great wealth. Instead, they heroically dedicate their precious youth, their blood, and even their lives to fulfill this wonderful dream. The text argues that it is the blood and sweat of these sacrificers that opens up a bright future for later generations, liberating humanity step by step. Which leaves us with a final, really provocative thought. We've just walked through Sui Feng's detailed critique of past utopias and his radical, lawless, family-free blueprint for a second home governed entirely by life-changing values. Regardless of whether you view this specific blueprint as a workable reality or just an impossible dream, we really have to ask, is a perfect society truly achievable? Or is this unrelenting pursuit of perfection, this constant, exhausting striving across generations to build a better world, the very thing that truly drives humanity forward? Let that sink in for a bit.